Hey everyone. I know people will be filing in. Is that what you do electronically? Whatever, electronically filing in. I am Chris Cillizza. I am here with Claire Atkinson, who, much to my joy and thrill, agreed to join me early in 2025 to sort of give the broad landscape of where we are in the media world. Claire, for people who don't know, you should, but if for people who don't know Claire, she worked at NBC, the New York Post. She is now has, most importantly for me and for her probably at this point, there are two things you need to know about Claire. Number one, she writes the Media Mix, which is a great Substack that I subscribe to and you should too. That's number one. And number two, Claire is writing a book about the Murdoch family. So that is going to be a banger in the in the parlance of my 15-year-old son.
Yeah.
So Claire, let me. I want to go big and talk about the media, but let's go.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to skip this because I don't think you can talk about the media really without talking about Fox News, right? I mean, it's a
Right.
gigantic part of the conversation. So
It is.
give me your tell me why you decided to write a book about the Murdochs. I mean, there's
Good
a lot
question.
there. Tell me why you decided to do it and what I know you're still in process, right? So I know you don't. But
Yeah, I
what's
mean,
the thesis of sort of how Rupert and the family have influenced, particularly American political television, media, and politics?
yeah, I mean, it's a great question. The catalyst for the book is a funny story because I left Business Insider and I went for lunch with somebody and they said, you should write a book. And I said to them, the only person I would want to write a book about is Rupert Murdoch. Because to me, he is the most fascinating person of the last 100 years by far. Um,
Interesting.
I love newspaper history. I love the history of Fleet Street. I did a communications degree. I've written about communications and media for the past 3 decades. And so Rupert has been a central story to our business for as long as I've been doing this. Um,
Absolutely. Me too.
yeah,
He's
he's
a
been around a
prime
long
mover,
time, as
right?
you know.
He's a prime mover both in media and then in culture more broadly. Like whether you
Exactly.
like him or you hate him.
Yes. So then what happened is literally the next day after I have this lunch, an agent calls me and says, I'm looking for somebody to write a biography about Rupert Murdoch. And everybody tells me you are the person to do it. And I said, well, that must be serendipity because I literally just talked about it yesterday. And that's how the ball got rolling. And then we went to publishers, and then there was an auction, and we talked to publishers in Australia, in the UK, and then I sold rights around Europe, and it's been a stunning ride already. I've been to Scotland, where the family is from, a little village in Rosehearty. I've been all over Australia. Um, it's a global. Rupert's story is a global story, and we think of it as just an American or
Yep.
UK and Australia story, but it really isn't. Rupert's life has been about trying to conquer Russia and China and Latin America and India. And, he was really at the forefront of, the predecessor of social media, I guess, or technology was satellites. And, 20, 30 years ago, the arrival of the 500 cable universe and what homogenized news was going to do to all these different countries around the world was the big fear. In the same way we are fearing what China is doing with TikTok and how it can influence
Yep.
young minds here, that was the discussion like 20 or 30 years ago.
I
And
remember it.
forefront of that. So
And what is your like what is your I'm always fascinated. This is inside baseball, but what is your interaction, if any, with the Murdoch world? Because they're notoriously sort
closed.
of self-contained, right? Like, how do
Well,
you write a book
yeah.
about them if maybe they are cooperating, but I assume they're not? Like, how do you do? Just like walk me through how you do the process of that.
The process is literally emailing and calling everybody I've ever talked to for the last 30 years. You just have to, track down the people. Um, a lot of it is not that difficult. Everybody has a Rupert Murdoch elevator story in this business. Everybody has interacted with him because he isn't a CEO CEO who sits behind a desk. He's out there. He goes to, the Republican convention in Milwaukee. He is like a journalist. I mean, he's on the beat, he's calling people. And so the number of people who have information about Rupert's world is actually pretty large. And, my experience of Rupert when he was the CEO of Fox, he would be one of the very few CEOs that would have the analyst call on the quarterly earnings, and then he would have the media call.
Right.
And you could ask him questions.
Right. He's
And
over business and editorial.
yeah, and the same with Lachlan. He's at the Christmas parties in a way, or the holiday parties in a way that a lot of other CEOs are not. They're not afraid of the media. They're a very locked down company when it comes to, Fox News. You don't see a lot of tattle in the same way that you do about MSNBC and CNN.
Yep.
But they are, I would say, they're not afraid to interact with the media in any way because they know it, right? It's their business.
Which is fascinating because I have always been amazed in all my years of doing this is the people who hate stories about them and the media asking questions about them the most are reporters. I'm like, that's your job. Anyway, all right, let's use Fox News to get into sort of a part of this broader discussion, which is why I really wanted to talk to you, which is so for people in cable TV is not the whole universe, and we'll get into digital and all that stuff too. But for people who've been paying attention, Fox's ratings have, I don't know if soared is the right word. I mean, Fox was already acres ahead of MSNBC and CNN when it came to cable ratings. But their ratings have gone up since Trump won, and MSNBC and CNN's have continued, at least in CNN's case, and probably in MSNBC's case too, continue to go down.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? Is that temporary? How worried if I worked for MSNBC or CNN, which I don't anymore. I have worked for both of them in the past.
Yes.
How worried would you be if you were them?
Well, I think there's a few factors at work. I remember when the last cycle, right after Jan 6, Fox had earnings. Fox News was the topic of conversation, and their ratings were tanking, and folks were headed to Newsmax. And Lachlan was on an earnings call, and he said, we're just going to continue to do what we do. We are the loyal opposition. And so I think that, this happens every cycle. There's no doubt about it. But what's different this time around is that Trump won again. And so if you are a viewer of CNN or MSNBC, you are throwing your hands up in the air and saying, I can't take it all over again. And so you do not want to expose yourself to more conversation about why the Democrats lost. But I think things will pick up. There's a lot going on. There's obviously the LA fires are a huge story. What I've told you, I'm here in France, and so I'm watching the American news on a French television system. So I get CNN, I can watch, I can watch CNBC and Bloomberg and Al Jazeera and a whole bunch of different news channels from around the world to see, what's happening in the States. And, what I felt like that since Trump was elected, I imagine Trump and Susie Wiles and Don Jr. get in a room and they say, what are the stories that we're going to feed to the media this week? And we'll send Don Jr. off to Greenland, and he's going to fly around, and there's going to be some great visuals, and Dad's going to talk about Greenland in a speech a couple of days before. And it's all, maybe it's not this planned out, but it feels to me like they understand the news media needs meat every day, and they throw it to the wolves. And so there's always something to talk about. And when there's a big real news story, all of the fluff goes to the sides, and everybody goes back to the LA fires, and it's serious news. And for all of Elon's talk about how they are the media now, or how social media is driving the stories, what we see is confusion on social media, and we see reality in the LA Times on the cable news. And I think that's when journalism and when journalists are at their best is when there's a fire. And that's what we're seeing right now. Literally, journalists rising to the challenge, and for all the talk about, the chaos inside the LA Times and the Washington Post and all of these brawligarchs kissing the ring of Trump. The product is what people come for, and when they need to know what's really happening in the news, legacy media is where they go.
Yeah, that's the thing that I struggle the most with as I think about this stuff is like I absolutely agree with you that the spine of journalism, right? The thing on which all the people like me are built off of is the news gathering operations at these
Mhm.
big entities, right? I mean, I don't have the ability to have a reporter in LA and a reporter in Kabul. And it, right? I mean, it's just these news organizations do. And I think, I mean, I know from my experience at CNN, that's their great
Yeah.
advantage is people, right? They've got a lot of people that they can throw at any kind of big breaking
Mhm.
news story. The thing I wonder about, and I don't know the answer to this. I'm mostly selfishly asking you to see if you do. Is how do you make money?
Yeah.
Right? Because
Doing that.
news gathering, for people who don't know, it costs a lot of money to, if you're in the TV business, have satellite trucks everywhere, have cameramen, have lighting people, have makeup people, have uh, people who are helping set shots up. I mean, not to mention whatever you're paying the on-air person. It costs a it's hugely laborious and hugely expensive. And
Yes.
what worries me is you mentioned Elon and Twitter, I guess X, whatever. The thing that worries me is because any breaking news thing can immediately be cannibalized and chopped up and put on Instagram, and like where it initially came from doesn't really matter.
Hmm.
It feels like that almost makes it harder to monetize this thing that is the sort of spine
Yes.
of journalism. So that's what I worry about. Like, I
Yeah.
think that's dying because I think the business end of it doesn't make sense. But in it dying, it's going to have a reverberations way beyond.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, uh, the cable news business and the lack of growth is a problem that they created themselves, right? Cable news is a highly profitable business because it's
Yes.
people sat behind desks.
Yep.
It's mostly not people calling in from Russia or wherever. And I watch channels here, France 24, which is funded by the French government. They will do a story from anywhere around the globe, and they have a correspondent
Yep.
there. CNN is a very well resourced news organization. They have a separate channel called CNN International, and it's mostly different people.
Yes.
And they are, Christiane Amanpour I watch every night. And so the problem of the lack of funding is twofold. Number one, it is that cable ratings are going away because the entity, the MSOs, as we used to call them in cable, um, are disappearing, and the big media companies want us to move off and watch them in streaming. And they have collapsed the entertainment cable channels, and they've said, we want the viewers to go over here because now we'll be able to tell the advertisers a lot more information about who the
Yep.
viewers are. So if you can all move over here, please. But the problem is that's all still under construction, and there aren't quite enough people over on this other side, and so advertisers, the money isn't still there in it's still not mass enough, so to speak. And then on the other hand, you have folks being able to check in elsewhere and see the raw materials of journalism and think that they can decide for themselves what's real and what isn't. And then, we have this incredible confusion about what reality is. And that's kind of where we're at right now. We're in the middle of a cycle of chaos until we can all get to the other side and until we can see enough advertising revenue in streaming. And then, hopefully we're in a better place. But, you have to plant the seeds over there, and not everybody is, as you
Can
well know.
I want to pick at just one thread that you mentioned earlier, which is, you said, and I agree with you, that when the news industry is talking less about itself and more doing its job when it's at its best, right? The
Mhm.
LA fires, any sort of natural disaster, even I would say the the reporting on the Trump legal cases. You know, I mean, like that's just sort of like, okay, this briefing was filed and here's what it means, and
Mhm.
explaining things to people. What I worry about, and I was thinking this while you were talking, is you said that's when they do their best, sort of presenting reality. I worry though that that's not what people want. They want reality that comports to their views. You know,
Yeah.
the LA fires are because Gavin Newsom is a giant liberal who didn't approve of water thing, you know, or how dare anyone on the other side, how dare anyone question Karen Bass for leaving for Ghana prior to or right on the edge of the fire starting? Like, it just
Mm,
feels to me like we live in a world where you can choose your own news, and I put news in quotes, air quotes, on purpose, and that's what people want.
yeah.
I've seen with Substack writing about politics is,
Yeah.
and I've seen this on YouTube too. You know the channels that and the newsletters that grow the fastest in politics on Substack and on YouTube, the ones that are incredibly partisan and predictably so because they affirm someone's
Mhm.
beliefs. So that's what worries me. It's like I agree with you. I think the media is shining in moments like this. I
Yes.
just don't know if we're in a giant minority of people who even care.
Well, I read your piece about Joe Biden a few
Yeah,
days ago, and I thought it was great. And, we think of misinformation and disinformation as a right wing product. And yet people come to the news and they say, hey, why am I learning that Joe Biden isn't senile, is not complex mentis enough to be president?
yep,
Why am I only just learning this now? Or why am I being told that Joe Biden is stepping down because he's being honorable when what in fact happened was he was told to leave?
correct.
And
He
so
was
I loved
pushed.
your column. I loved what you wrote. It was reality. And I think what's happened to the media on both sides is this inability when it's your side to get to the heart of the matter. And when I watched Sky News, a reporter from Sky News, who I believe is Scottish, really get to her and say, hey, why weren't you there? What do you have to
Totally.
say to people? Do the tough journalism. That's what people want, and I think that there's a lack of that. I think if you watch, I like to watch Fox News when the Democrats are in power, and I like to watch MSNBC and CNN when the Republicans are in power because you get the better journalism. And so what we're missing is both of these polar, teams on polar opposites being able to criticize their own teams.
Yeah, thank you for that on that piece. You know what was remarkable is the reaction. Now, I always remind myself the comment section is not indicative of the broader readership, and I'm not particularly focused on. I always say to people, my job isn't to make you happy. My job is to tell you how I think it is. But the
Yeah,
comment section on that piece, which essentially said, like, look, Democrats misled us,
absolutely.
right? The commentary was like, oh, who cares? Move on. And I was like,
No.
but if I mean, I don't want to play the what about game, but like, if it came out that Donald Trump was, I mean, imagine the shoes on the other foot. Donald Trump puts in that debate performance after his staff spent months telling us that he's great, he's so sharp behind the scenes. Like, it's amazing to me that people, the partisan hat can
Hmm.
never be taken off. That's what worries me about
Yes.
the kind of journalism we're trying to do, which is independent, yes, free from a big mainstream media company, but also independent in not just predictably in, you
Yeah,
know,
we have a loyal opposition, or we're supposed to be, right? And that's the job, is to question power, no matter who it is, whether it's Joe Biden or Kamala or Trump. Our job is to ask the questions that people sitting at home would like asked of them, whether it's convenient or not.
that's
And
exactly
I
right.
don't
And
think people did that right before this election. I don't think they did. And maybe
so
it's because they didn't have access, but I felt like I didn't need to be an advisor to Joe Biden in the White House to see that he was not capable of being president for the next 4 years.
yeah,
That's not a mystery to anybody. You
no,
didn't
anyone who has
get the
eyes can
room
see that.
to see that, right?
That's right. I always say, like, if you thought after you watch that debate, like, yeah, I definitely want this guy to be president for 4 more years. I mean, after I watched that debate, I was like, I don't know that he should be president tomorrow, right? Like,
Right.
if you
Or
have
right
eyes, like,
now.
um, So I was thinking of this because I know you're in France for the moment. Some people have suggested to me, because one of the things I keep coming back to, and I don't know how the hell you solve this problem, is you trust in the mainstream media is like, I mean, it's in the 20s. I think it's right around like it's right. Journalists are right around in terms of trust, right? Like used car salesmen and politicians, which is not a great place to be.
Yeah.
Some people have said, look, what we should do is just follow the UK model, which is just have these news organizations have like a clear partisan bent to them. Like just say like, okay, what the Washington Post is liberal. I mean, this wouldn't happen, but the New York Times is conservative, whatever the hell it is.
Yeah.
Can we get it? Is that viable? And then if it's not, which I think it probably isn't, but if it's not, what the hell do we do with this fact that the media is dog shit in terms of how people trust us? That's a technical term.
Gosh. I mean, they're all really good questions, Chris. Um, you know what? I think, just comparing US media to European media, um, there's a lot more just the facts, please. But I think, that's very difficult to do that when you have a president or, an about to be president. It feels like Donald Trump's been president already for a year and he didn't even take office yet.
Not even in office. 10 more days.
Yeah, I feel like he's eaten up the news cycle since the election. I don't know what you do when Trump says things like, we're not ruling out military action to take over Panama or to take over Greenland or whatever, and nobody wants to really push back on a crazy statement. You see all these politicians and they'll dance around it, but they won't say anything like, we'll meet force with force, or that's an absolute crazy thing to say. Like nobody calls them out because there's like a fear of upsetting power. And so I don't really have an answer to the question other than to say people shouldn't be fearful about taking on power. And I feel that's what we're seeing
That's the
right now.
job.
What we're seeing is there's a fear of taking on Trump, and that comes from the very top of the tree. These people who own these news organizations. You and I know when you work at CNN or you work at NBC, there are very strict limits on what you can do and say as a reporter. You can't take
Absolutely.
gifts, you can't give political donations. And then you have the owners of these organizations donating money to Donald Trump's inauguration. That's a huge, huge conflict.
One of my, this is a total sidebar, but one of my biggest annoyances working at the Washington Post and at CNN, and this is true of NBC too, is like the national pork producers would be like, hey, we're having our conference in Miami. We'd love for you to come and like do a 30-minute talk about like the political landscape. And I'd be like, hey, the pork producers want me to do this. And they'd be like, no, you can't do that. It'd be like $5,000.
Yeah,
They'd be like,
right.
no, you can't. Conflict of interest. I was like, I never write about the pork industry.
Right.
And if you want me to disclose it, I'm happy to disclose it. But to your point, then you have these people doing, it's like, well, it's good for the goose. It should be good for the gander.
Right,
And yet
right.
it's not.
I mean, Jeff Bezos going to Mar-a-Lago and all of these tech guys donating $1 million to the inauguration fund. And then you have Amazon. Variety broke a story this week about Amazon's thinking about news specials. They have Brian Williams covering the election. I don't know what you do about that other than to just call it out. Like it's wrong and it shouldn't be happening. But it is what it is. We're in this
Why?
world.
Because it's a why is that bad?
Why is it bad that Jeff Bezos is at Mar-a-Lago, that Tim Cook and all these, the Google guy,
I get that.
Elon.
Why is it bad, the Brian Williams Amazon thing?
Well, because, we've seen that the Washington Post didn't, or Jeff Bezos directed the Washington Post not to endorse Kamala, and that's what the editors wanted to do. I think in some ways it's a little bit pearl clutching to say, oh, these media owners are putting their thumbs on the scales. Well, of course they do. And
I was going to say, yes.
if they don't do it publicly, they're doing it behind the scenes. And so, that's been the way, that's been certainly Rupert's way, and he's been pretty open about it. And funnily enough, he's not in this conversation about the big tech guys kissing Donald Trump's ass. He hasn't been in that conversation at all because I don't think he does. Maybe Fox News is a cheerleader for Trump, but Rupert certainly preferred another candidate, right? He tried his best to make it Ron DeSantis, and that didn't work out. So, I think that brings us to the conversation about independent media and media
Yeah.
that isn't owned, and who should own it, and how, what should the funding be? What should the business model of news be? And I think that's, an endless topic that we can talk about
Yeah,
for another
no.
hour.
Oh gosh, I've spent lots and lots of hours thinking about it for myself. So yeah, let's have
Yeah.
a little bit of that conversation, which is like, what I mean, the things that I liked. Let me say the things that I liked about mainstream media. I liked working in a newsroom, although that's greatly reduced post COVID. Even in these big
Yeah.
newsrooms, people don't really go in.
Yeah.
But I like. I mean, when I was a young reporter working at the Washington Post, there were smart people I could interact with. It was great. I could like go talk to David Broder about politics. I mean, it was amazing. So I miss that. I miss the sense of there's a big apparatus in place to help. CNN, for example, has a standards and practices place. Now, it was often a pain in my ass, and I would chafe against it. But they
Yeah.
they have people who are looking at things and trying to make sure everything is sealed up and buttoned up and right. Doesn't mean mistakes don't happen, but it exists. So
Mm.
I like that kind of feeling that there was a safety net there.
Yeah.
Um, those things don't exist as much in our world, I and I wonder, the independent people I've seen that have had huge success, at least in politics, are people who were very early adapters in Substack's case. Matt Iglesias, who was doing it 5.5 years ago when no one else was, or
Mhm.
people like Nate Silver who are selling like a widget, like he's got his model, and if you want his model, you have to pay for it. Or the more partisan stuff. That's either Donald Trump is the best or Donald Trump is the worst. I get all of those models. The model I worry about is the one that we're trying to carve. Admittedly, you more in media and me more in politics, but is like, well, I don't really have a set agenda that I'm operating from. I don't think everything Donald Trump does is idiotic.
Right. Being in the
Uh,
middle is a tough place to be,
and
right?
that's what mainstream media to me protected. We will help you make a living and do work that you, now people disagree with this, but that you believe is intellectually honest and as objective as one can be in this world.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know what the financial setup is, but I'd be interested in what you think.
Well, there is this big Cambrian explosion of voices right now. I mean, I look at my own email, I have hundreds of Substacks, and they're all
Yes.
great. And I probably spend as much time reading independent Substack newsletters as I do the mainstream media, maybe more. And I think when you hit on a topic or an audience that isn't being served, you can make a ton of money. And I think about people like you or Barry Weiss or Lee Fang or
Hmm.
um, Judd Lagoom. Like, he's
Yep.
fantastic. There's tons of different niches. It's hard work. You have to be prepared to spend a day writing a 500-word story. And people perhaps don't understand that the fact checking, the news gathering, and everything else, the headline writing, and the incredible number of times you have to read something to make sure there's no spelling mistakes and it reads
Yes.
correctly and the photo looks good and everything
Another
else.
thing I miss from the olden days, although it doesn't even
Somebody
exist
else will do it.
anymore, is
Right.
people who copy edited your stuff. It doesn't really. The Washington Post, when I was there, had like a huge copy editing team that would like go through and be like, "This shouldn't be a comma. This is
Right.
misspelled." I mean, they got rid of all those people, but yes, I
Yeah.
miss that too.
Yeah. But I kind of feel like what in some ways like fanzines. Remember fanzines about music when you were a kid and somebody stapled some stuff together and it went around college? I kind of feel like the Substack newsletters are that for our era. And I think out of that, we're going to see like the Vices and the BuzzFeeds and the next generation of where media is going. These voices are going to emerge as businesses, I hope.
I do too. What do you think? I agree. I mean, I think independent media will continue to grow. It'll grow in fits and starts, and there'll be successes and failures, but it'll grow in fits and starts. What do
Yeah.
you make? Let's fast forward in our minds, and I know it's a hypothetical, and we never know for sure, but let's fast forward in our minds to September 2028. Right. So we are beginning the
Yeah.
general election campaign of 2028.
Oh my gosh.
What? Well, I know what it will happen.
Yeah.
What do different do big mainstream media organizations look that day than they look today, and how so?
Well, I would guess that CNN would be under a different owner. That would be my first prediction. That Warner would look to sell CNN to somebody else, whether that ends up in private equity hands or Fox, I don't know, or
Yeah,
Paramount, or maybe even, maybe it's private equity with a Middle Eastern fund behind it. Um, that's kind of a trend that people, maybe it's not explicit, but we see a lot of money from Qatar and Saudi Arabia in the news business. And,
tons.
and it's, it comes through private equity companies that then buy assets. And so CNN under a different owner, I guess that would be a prediction. What else might we see? I think, to your point, the cable news audience will have migrated somewhere else and it will live on streaming.
So
Uh,
there'll still be, I mean, my belief is like, you're not going to go to CNN.com on September 5th, 2028, and it's going to be a dead link. Like it'll
yeah,
exist, but you think that the kind of audience migration away from these big mainstream media entities will continue. Like it's not going to, it may decline like this, but it's not going to go and start
well,
moving
I
back
think it's
up.
still going to keep declining, mainly because people keep dumping cable. I mean, that's a simple fact. People are getting rid of cable, and everybody keeps hoping it's going to plateau, and it keeps declining.
It's not. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, NBC, when I was there, they were building a streaming news outlet called NBC News Now, and it's very, there were no big expensive anchors there, and so that's the future that I see. That when these renewals come up, like we're
Yeah.
seeing with Coder today,
Yeah.
it will be the news industry will be a place where there aren't any more $25 million Anderson Coopers anymore. There'll
Yeah.
be a lot of faceless folks who maybe, are quite lowly paid or they're very young. And so, the cable news business will look very different in 3 years.
I think you're totally right. And I think, you've seen some of that with sports media in this country, which is, ESPN back in the day, Sports Center was its flagship show. I mean, as a college kid, I would watch it constantly. And
Mhm.
it produced real stars. Stuart Scott, Dan Patrick, Keith Olbermann. And now they've sort of moved away from that to sort of
Yeah,
these nameless, faceless people who they pay, I mean, a decent amount of money, but nowhere near what they
yeah,
were paying those people
right.
because they just can't monetize it. I mean, it's just the product is shrinking, not
Yes.
growing.
And
Um,
again, it's a product that's shrinking because they moved all their best stuff off cable onto streaming. If I were an agent or a TV agent, that would be what I'm saying. Like the audience is going away because you are pushing it somewhere else. Therefore, my client still needs to be compensated.
right, exactly. I've had that conversation with my agents many, many times. Can I do it? I want to do just because it's sort of near and dear to my heart. I want to do just a few minutes on the Washington Post. Look, the Washington Post has, even with Watergate, the Washington Post has always been the little brother to the New York Times. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, I always, when I was at the Post, I realized the Post spent inordinate amount of time thinking about the New York Times, and I think the New York Times spent very little time thinking about the Washington Post. That's kind of always been the relationship.
Yeah.
But it feels to me, and that the gap always journalistically, the number of people they had, the number of resources they could throw was always the Times always had more.
Yeah.
But it feels to me now like that gap, during the Marty Baron years, it was sort of getting, and I was at the tail end of that.
Mhm.
Bezos buying it infused this, it was no
Mhm.
longer a public company. I think Don Graham would have loved to spend what Bezos was able
Yes.
to spend, but he just couldn't, right? You have to answer to
No.
the board and your stockholders. But
Right.
so there was like a moment there, mid 2000s, where it felt like the gap was narrowing. And then I
Mm.
look at the Post. I just read a piece in Vanity Fair by Charlotte Klein about the Post, and it's like, I mean, the morale and the talent drain is like
Yeah.
significant. Like, what do you do if you're them? You know, what if I make you the publisher of the Washington Post tomorrow? Sorry, Will Lewis. Like, what do you? What's the? Do you do more
Oh, God.
politics? Do you do less politics? Do you do more video? Do you do more print? Like, what? What do you do?
Well, first of all, remember when Fox got into trouble because they had producers in the background saying we're going to lose the audience if we tell the truth on television.
Yes.
You know, when they said if we say that if we don't put these people on who are defending Trump and saying that he lost the election, the audience is going to leave us and they're going to go to Newsmax. And so, there's a certain amount of thought that should be given to that about who your audience is and what niche you're in when you're running a news brand. And I kind of feel like what's happening at the Post is a little bit like what happened to Budweiser when they hired the trans
Yep.
lady to be a brand ambassador.
Influencer or whatever. Yeah.
And Budweiser's brand is guys in cowboy hats on horses with smoking Marlboro lights. That's in my mind, that's the person. And so the Washington Post was about taking on Donald Trump, right? That was the essence of its brand. And now it
Guys
is
in darkness.
turn the Titanic and say, you know what, guys, we're not about that anymore. We're going to be about something very different. And so the audience, they've got two problems. The audience doesn't like that. And the people that work there, and as well as I do, that journalists in newsrooms have a very loud voice when things are happening in their newsrooms that they don't like. But I do think that you also have to be a realist about the business. And I'm a business journalist, and you got to have money coming in to make the factory full of staff. And so I think some of Will's ideas were actually good ones, like have a social media newsroom or do something different than
Try something else.
Try and be where the kids are. I think that's an unpopular thing to say, but you have to go where the ball is going.
Yep.
I think Will came in with some good ideas, and I think that things went kind of sideways. And I think when the female editor gets pushed over, and then she trashes you all over town, and then
Not been a good run for him.
It's not been good from a lot of different directions.
But I agree with you. He actually said something. I wrote about this, and it made me not particularly popular with some of my former colleagues. But he came in and he did a town hall. They do the Washington Post, having worked there for a long time. They love town halls. They love nothing more than town halls where people air their grievances.
Yeah.
And in this, it was reported out. In it, he essentially said, I'm paraphrasing him, but he essentially said, like, we need to change things. People are not reading your stuff. And I was kind of like, that's correct. Like,
right.
Looking at the Washington Post, which lost whatever, 100 million in 2023, I would assume it's going to lose somewhere around that in 2024, and saying like, things are going great, just keep the course. No business would do that. So like, I actually thought like, yeah, they do need to change things. Now, for me, my issue just watching from the outside is I don't know. I know he wants to change, and I think that's right. I don't totally know what his vision of what it should be is, and I think that's partly because I'm not sure he knows. I'm not sure there is like if there was an easy way to make these big media organizations make money, people would do it.
Right. And I think if you've got Jeff Bezos's money behind you, you would imagine you can't lose, right? I mean, it's an expensive
Just
endeavor.
how much he wants to spend.
Right.
I think Will Lewis has realized or made the decision. Look, if it's going to come down to me being beloved by the newsroom or me being beloved by Jeff Bezos, I'm going to go with being beloved by the richest man in the world. Do you know what I mean? Like sorry, Elon, the second richest man in the world. Like, right. I think because even if this doesn't work out, like, well, Bezos will find something else for Will Lewis to do, right? You know what I mean? It's like, that's not going to be. So I think he's kind of, because I read all these stories, it's like, he's lost the newsroom. I was like, well, yeah, but the billionaire who owns the company is really who matters. Now there can be a downward and upward effect there, but
Yeah. I mean, I think if Amazon is going to be doing news specials on Amazon Prime, then that's kind of interesting. You know, it could be that Jeff Bezos is thinking that the Washington Post is perhaps going to help them on the other side of the fence, sell some ads around a news product. I mean, maybe that's what happens. I mean, I think that news organizations have to figure out social media. It's such a big piece of our world now, and it's growing. At the same time, we've got this TikTok ban on the horizon, and we've got Australia saying we're going to ban social media for under 16s. I just talked to my daughter and I said, what should I say about TikTok? And she said, Mom, I spend too much time on there for no real reason. And, I feel the same way about all social media. I'd like to get off it and spend less time there. I mean, that's a hope.
How old is she?
She's 19.
My 15-year-old boy and 12-year-old boy would be devastated. They are not as thoughtful and mature as your daughter. They would be devastated by a TikTok ban.
Yeah.
But I do think, forget TikTok and the China thing, which is a whole separate conversation, but I do think we need to figure something out. This is not a parenting conversation, but I do think we need to figure something out vis-a-vis social media, because it is, I get mad at my kids for looking at it so much, but then I realize, well, the algorithm is literally built to addict you to this thing. And I get mad at them while I'm mad at myself. So it's like, dude, you can't. All right. So I want to end with a little bit of what we touched on at the start, but I want to circle back to it, which is sort of where you are at the moment, which is Fox News and the Murdochs more broadly. Because I really do think that the current political world in which we find ourselves has been shaped by a lot of forces. But if I had to name two, if not the two of the most important, I would say Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes.
Yeah.
They have created a lot of the space that either people occupy or people exist in opposition to. How much of this was planned? Yeah, I mean, like, how much of this was Rupert and to whatever extent Ailes was involved in the beginning and the creation of this? How much of this was like, okay, this is where we're going to go, and how much of it was like, oh, this is working, we're going to lean further into it?
Well, I think Rupert, from the very beginning, saw a lane, right? And the lane was nobody is serving the viewers in cable on the right.
Yep.
And Ted had set up CNN, and NBC and Microsoft had set up the predecessor to MSNBC, which was America's Talking, which Roger ran for a little bit.
Amazing.
He did all of his little experiments over at NBC about what would work and what wouldn't. And Rupert had been thinking for quite some time about how to do news. He had already launched. I mean, this is something to say, right? Fox News is a Rupert Roger creation. Rupert also created Sky News in the UK.
Yep.
It has a fantastic reputation.
Yep.
It's now owned by Comcast and it's part of NBC, or it's a sister company to NBC Universal. But yes, Fox News, Rupert saw a lane that wasn't being catered for and he served it. And it's been hugely popular since it began. I think it was maybe 5 years in, and 5 years in before it overtook CNN.
I mean, that's remarkable.
Yeah, and I would argue that
go ahead.
if Rupert hadn't done that, it would still exist. Somebody would be running a right-wing cable channel right now, even if it wasn't Rupert. Because Rush Limbaugh was hugely popular on talk radio, the predecessor of
conservative books always sold. Conservative books are always on the New York Times book bestseller list.
Right. What was the guy who ran Family Channel? The religious guy, I've forgotten his name.
Robertson.
Yeah. He had what was it?
Club, all that.
Exactly. So this is a piece of the American psyche. It's part of the American landscape, and it always will be, I think. Um, that's not to say I agree with everything on Fox News, but I do feel like sometimes I switch it on and I'm like, yeah, I would have asked that question too, you know?
It's so interesting to me because having I was a contributor at MSNBC when I worked at the Post. Then I obviously worked at CNN, and so early in my career when Sean Hannity did a show with a guy named Alan Colmes, it was like from the right and
I
from the left.
remember
I
that.
used to go on that, but I haven't been
Yeah,
on the network in forever. But it strikes me as I often will look at one of the benefits of working at a cable station. I will tell you is they have these TVs at your desk that you can watch Fox and MS and CNN and whatever fourth one you want to watch, News Nation,
right.
whatever, um, simultaneously. And I was always struck by and continue to be struck by the fact that, like, what Fox is doing and covering is not at all similar most of the time to
Hmm.
what CNN and MSNBC are covering. Now, there are times when CNN and
Hmm.
MSNBC diverge, but they're largely kind of on top of the same stories.
Yeah.
Fox typically is doing something totally different. I mean, it feels like it's different in kind. I know it's a cable news
Yeah.
channel, just like
Yeah.
these other ones, but
Yeah.
like they're doing a lot of reporting on what the media says. Like they
Yeah.
do more media reporting. They do more media commentary. Like,
Right.
did you
Yeah.
see this thing that CNN? Like, I guarantee you, I haven't watched it, but I guarantee you, they did a whole. They've dedicated significant time to the clothespins on David Muir's the
Yes.
jacket, which is ridiculous, but the clothespins on his jacket to make him look like more jacked. Like I guarantee they've done that. Whereas CNN and MSNBC are not going to do that story, right?
Right.
So
Right.
it's fascinating to me. Like who is making whose editorial? I know it was Roger and Rupert's editorial vision, and I always say whatever you think of Roger. Roger's a television genius. Like you can argue he's an evil genius, but he's definitely
Yeah.
a genius. Who is Rupert the editorial vision still, or is it been kind of? I know it's complicated
Yeah.
within the
Well,
family.
look, I worked at the company for 7 years and I worked at the New York Post. And what my observation was that if you were entertaining and you had something to say and you said it passionately, you could do what you wanted. Like, there were not that many people saying, go this way or go that way, or we don't like this or we don't like that. That's not to say there's not some editorial judgment. I think there is. But I think, look at Maria Bartiromo. She really, I think, does what she wants at the network. Um, I am really sad to see the business guy who just stepped down, whose name just Neil Cavuto. I'm very sad to see Neil Cavuto leaving because I think that Neil always spoke truth to power, and you know he didn't toe the party line on a lot of stuff, and he was quite outstanding in the face of a lot of pressure, I guess, to say otherwise. But I think there's a lot of different voices. I watch Jesse Waters, and I don't get how he gets away with half the things he says on air. But he does entertain people.
I was going to say yes, Fox News is clearly like to the right. But I
Yeah.
always think that like the difference between Fox and CNN and MSNBC is Fox admits that they're in the entertainment business
Mm,
ultimately
yeah.
about getting people to watch. So it's like, it's like in the UK where it's like naked lady pictures in the it's like, well, we kind of know what you want. We're
Yeah.
gonna sandwich some other stuff around it, but whereas MSNBC and CNN are while they are still, I think it is ultimately a battle for eyeballs. So you are at some level in the entertainment business. It's on television. It's a television show. They
Mm-hmm.
still are sort of adhering to more what we would call capital J journalistic standards. And by the way,
Yes.
they're losing by doing that, which is a little bit depressing. But they are. I mean, Fox is winning by every single measure. Fox News is sort of soaring at the moment, while these other two sort of try to find their footing. Um, Tell me, and I know you're in the midst of it. And by the way, if you do not subscribe to Claire's Substack, you should. The Media Mix. if you have not pre-ordered, is the book available for pre-order,
Not
Claire?
yet. Not
Okay.
yet.
All
I'll
right.
come
So
back
put
and do
a
another
note
one
to your
when it's about to be, though.
note to yourself, but we'll do another one of these because I'm
Yeah.
endlessly fascinated by the media. But
Yeah.
Claire's book about the Murdochs, 2025 or 2026, it will be out. Um, so I know you're in the midst of the book, but I just want to end on this. Is there I feel like so much is known about the
Yes.
Murdochs because a lot of their dirty laundry is aired publicly. Um, is there something in your reporting that you were like, "Oh shit, that's interesting," like that you, someone who's covered this world for a really long time,
Yes.
were surprised by?
Oh my gosh, all the time, like every day. I'm deep in the history right now, so it kind of makes it difficult to speak about like what's to come because I'm in the weeds of the early years of the Adelaide news. But what I'm constantly stunned by is Rupert's relentlessness, his desire to win, his his drive, and his ability to most of us go through life, and if there's barriers to what we want to do, we go, oh well, I can't do it, there's a door there. Rupert bashes down the doors, and it doesn't even enter his mind that there's not a way to figure out what it is he wants to do. And I was just reading Lord Beaverbrook's book on success, which he wrote in 1921, and there are lessons in there that perhaps Rupert, perhaps he read this book, but it's like work hard, work harder than the next guy, be prepared for success. Don't work yourself into the ground that much that you can't see the long term. And I think a lot of Rupert's success is down to the fact that he doesn't answer to anybody, and he's been the single CEO of the company for decades. And the company is not encumbered by bureaucracy in the same way that
Yep.
a lot of the companies that we've worked for
Yep.
are. So even though it's got to become a global company, and now it's sold most of its assets to Disney, um, it's still a place of entrepreneurialism where you can move freely as long as you're successful, and you're allowed to fail, but not too often and not on such a big scale. And so, Rupert's business lessons, that I've talked to many, many people that have worked for him at a very high level, they've all told me, I learned the most under Rupert, and I had the best time of my career working at that company.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so it's been fascinating. It's not to say there's not a lot of mistakes been made, and obviously phone hacking and the Dominion libel suit are awful situations that I'm sure they wished hadn't occurred. But I'm an old-fashioned newspaper lover. When I go to the train station, I want to see that there are print magazines there. I want to see print thrive, even though it's clearly kind of at its end in the US. I am a great lover of old journalism lore, and doing this book has helped me, go back and learn about Northcliffe and Beaverbrook and all the things that they could see about what connects with ordinary people. For better or for worse, these old like press barons understood
Yep.
the buttons to press, like before Mark Zuckerberg understood what buttons to press to make you addicted to social media. But these big tech guys have taken over, and if there were a conclusion to our conversation today, it would be that very soon we're going to see the Amazons and the Apples and the Zuckerbergs, and the Elons be the future of where our business goes, for better or worse, because
Yep.
they're the places that have the money. And right now they're able to corral great global audiences. And so that is, there's a huge danger that doing nothing and letting them um, have their way and cozy up to Trump and be able to influence policy. And, they're really uh, the only people I see that are kind of putting any check on these guys is the EU. And
Yep.
Zuckerberg is saying to Trump, help me get around these regulations or push these guys over. And, then I can be free to allow free speech, or he's obviously saying he's against censorship. In our world, that would be reality. What were the fact checkers here? Were the people who were trying to bring reality to people? And he is the guy who's bringing the slop, in my view.
And it's also, what are you solving for, right? Are you solving for make more money? Are you solving for better society and more informed public? Ideally, those things dovetail, but
yeah,
we have seen, I think, in the last 10 years, they don't always dovetail. In
yeah.
fact,
I mean,
sometimes
they've
they're
come
on
apart
opposite
like
tracks.
credit default swaps, haven't they? I mean, what the truth and news is on one side, and the popularity and the stuff that the. I mean, I was at the Cannes Film Festival this year, and the journalists who write about film got pushed out because the content creators were prioritized everywhere they went. And I thought to myself, well, this is really a new day that journalists who write about the film business and who are quite serious people are being de-emphasized in
Yep.
favor of the podcasters and the folks who do things on social media that are not critical of whatever these projects are. And that is the direction that we're going if we're not careful.
And that the thing, I don't want to go too long, so we'll end. But the one thing that I always worry about is, like, I do think the flattening of the media, which is, yes, the New York Times still matters, but like any individual person who's doing this stuff can also have a big influence. The gap is no longer super wide. I think that's a good thing, broadly speaking. I think it's good. More people, more thoughts, more reporting. That's not a bad thing. The thing that, the end of the gatekeeping era of journalism, I get that. The thing that worries me, of course, is like what we saw during the 2024 campaign, which is like, well, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or Joe Biden would rather go on,
Yeah.
let's say Kamala Harris's case, she'd rather go on Pod Save America with a bunch of people who work for Barack Obama. It's going to be friendly than she would to go to Meet the Press or sit down with any kind of like mainstream journalist. And Trump would rather, call into Hugh Hewitt
Yeah.
the other week as opposed to, and it's kind of like, if all content is totally equal, that's going to be really hard. It's like if there's no priority given to, well, this is someone who is attempting to ask hard questions and speak truth to power, and this is someone who makes money off of being
Right.
pro or anti. If those two people are seen as equal,
And they're going to be
worries
in the
me.
press room, the White House press room together, though,
Really.
right?
And it's only going to accelerate because the election in this country, the lesson the media is taking is, and I think politicians are taking, is mainstream media is dying faster than you think, and you got to jump ship now, get over into these other outlets and these other spaces. If you're a politician, you need to talk to those other spaces. If you're a media member, you need to get into them and begin populating them. And so it's not like that decline. That decline, I think, has started to turn into this space, and I think might go bow up sometime soon. Anyway, Claire, thank you. This is what makes me so happy about Substack. So Claire and I do not know one another. I just like her work, to be totally honest. And I reached out to her and I said, "Hey, I like your work. Can we talk about the media?" And Claire is in France and I'm in Northern Virginia, and we're able to have this conversation. Which this to me, this is the collaboration piece that, like, I think makes this stuff good and better.
Yeah.
So Claire, I'm going to reach out again, and I will bug you, not too much, but if having written books before, I know there's nothing better than an excuse to not work on the book every second of the day. So I promise to give you that excuse. Again, Claire is writing about the Murdochs. If you are not interested in that topic, you are not alive. And you can check out her Media Mix Substack, and you should. I am a subscriber. You should be too. All right, Claire, enjoy the rest of your, well, I guess almost night now. Take care. I'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thanks for a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you so much.